In this video, I will recite an essay on my idea of how God rewards humanity for their engagement of life. Yes, I am temporarily talking about a topic that is not very common on this channel, which focuses on UFOs. But I am into near-death experiences, philosophy, and religion in general, so I do want to cover it at times. What I'm reciting to you, or will be reciting to you, will be published in a Medium article after this video is published. And I'm also going to include some commentary after I recite this essay to you that will not be included in the Medium article. So if the idea of eternal reward from God and how God might administer that reward, whether there's a fair way to administer that reward, whether the reward architectures that we find in religion seem just and fair or not, is something that interests you, you're probably going to want to listen to my essay. But enough introduction, let's just dive right into it. The concept of divine reward in many religions appears to me as constructs of human interpretation rather than reflections of absolute truth. The most striking example of this is religions that cast a person to eternal torment based on choosing the wrong religion. And yet, someone who's lived particularly immorally could have an epiphany while on their deathbed and subsequently receive everlasting paradise. The above is problematic on many levels. Firstly, it ignores how our minds are all wired differently. Our innate personality may favor one religion over another based on nothing more than our inherited genetics. It's perplexing to consider why the mere accident of our genetics should influence our fate in eternity. Furthermore, if we assume we didn't choose our parents, then our religious upbringing equates to a spin of the cosmic roulette wheel. Why should those born to parents with the right religion have such an enormous advantage over those conceived by parents with the wrong one? And this doesn't even account for culture. If you're born into a strong religious culture, you're far more likely to adopt the religious perspective it imparts versus other spiritual approaches to life. Again, this begs the question: why should the randomness of our birth location give some people such an overwhelming advantage over others on what their eternal destiny will be? Intellectually, I find this stunningly unfair. But it doesn't end there. As some religions are more liberal in that they don't demand that you adhere to them to have a portion in heaven. And yet, I still find this highly problematic, since we're talking about our eternal destiny. Why should someone with the wrong religion be given such a smaller reward for eternity versus someone who was born into the right one? And even with those born into the right religion, why should a single or even multiple lives, all of which are finite, dictate a person's eternal position before God? While I can see all of these reward architectures motivating people to be steadfast in their religious observance, because who doesn't want to be maximally rewarded, I still don't find them logically or ethically satisfying. Redefining spiritual rewards, a personal hypothesis. I hold a completely different perspective on rewards from the religions I've learned about. Perhaps the biggest and only reward is that we are all part of the infinite consciousness that defines reality. In this sense, God, or all that is literally our heritage. Thus, it is the cosmic heritage we all share that truly defines the essence of our reward. Forget about your cultural, religious, or ethnic background for just a moment, and consider that looking up into the inky blackness of space, littered with billions of stars, is where we come from and who we truly are. The infinite, eternal consciousness that contains the imagination to produce this magnificent tapestry resides within us all, and we are all a part of it. This isn't to suggest we're God, as I've never resonated with that notion, but we are part of the whole, and the totality is our spiritual, cosmic background and underpinning. By being an expansion of the infinite, so to speak, we are by definition part of it. And by being part of it, we necessarily partake in the goodness that is God. That goodness is our reward, however it manifests throughout eternity. So in that sense, the reward is simply our spiritual DNA persisting forever. The limitations of traditional reward structures. And if this infinite consciousness is endlessly merciful, then in my view, most religious reward architectures fall short. Perhaps the spiritual path doesn't end at death, where all our good deeds are accounted for and we receive their benefits for eternity. Maybe the truth is that the spiritual path is eternal, and there is no permanent retirement where we live off the benefits of our good deeds and knowledge attainment that can only be achieved in the physical realm. And instead of living just one or several lives, the refinement process encompassing incarnating into the physical realm is eternal. Maybe we keep returning, going from the spirit world to the physical world as an everlasting process. If this refinement process draws us closer to God and personifies part of our purpose, and such proximity is the ultimate reward, then I think that an endlessly merciful God obsessed with growth and learning would not curtail the process at a finite point, but instead would maintain it indefinitely. Wouldn't that be the ultimate expression of the mercy and love befitting of infinite consciousness? The wholeness of the divine, beyond growth and reward. Perhaps God is necessarily complete, because God is, by definition, the whole. And by definition, that which is whole cannot become more. We, as part of God, do not encompass the whole any more than a drop of water encompasses the entire ocean. So in this light, maybe we are on an eternal path to becoming more expansive, ever evolving, never becoming the whole, but always becoming more. And as we grow, learn, and refine, we become more like God, and consequently can partake in more of God's goodness. If God wants to give us all the goodness He can for all of eternity, then it makes no sense to me that there would be the various roadblocks curtailing that process that are found within various religions. Such roadblocks seem to me as overly anthropomorphic, misaligned with the expansive nature of truth. This essay doesn't claim to definitively refute the reward architectures of most religions. Rather, it's a speculative exploration into alternative spiritual understandings. It's only to explore why I'm unconvinced by the many reward architectures I've learned about, and that there are logical reasons to doubt such structures, even if there are rational reasons to accept them. So, to be clear, I don't know if God exists. I'm exploring the idea that if God exists, how should God administer reward, or how would God administer reward? However, what I would tell you is that even though I don't know if God exists, I think I probably pray more than the vast majority of those that are convinced that God exists. So you can take that dichotomy however you wish. Somehow, I find myself able to have a deep relationship with God as I perceive God, even though I lack 100% conviction that God exists. And I clearly have a lot of skepticism of religion. And that has not come out of a vacuum. Part of that is my past experience. I'm not really going to go into that now, but I've written an article about it on Medium titled, "The Night God Spoke to Me, Telepathy is Real." So my life experience contributed to my skepticism in religion. Ironically, or maybe not ironically, I'm sure there are plenty of people whose life experiences have prompted them to have more conviction that the religion they've chosen is absolute truth. So the fact that this dichotomy can exist, instead of it revealing that there is no God for me, it reveals that reality is much more complex than we tend to make it out to be. Going with that line of reasoning, every religion will have arguments as to why they're the true religion. And frankly, I'm sure some religions have better arguments than others. But let's say that there's a religion out there that has the best argument, that has the most evidence compared to all other religions. Should that convince anyone that it is absolute truth? Well, I mean, that's subjective, isn't it? It depends on the person. But I would argue that to be convinced on evidence alone would actually be premature, because there's too many suppositions built into that. For example, let's say some of the miracles that have occurred with any particular religion actually did occur. Whether it's Jesus' resurrection, or the revelation at Mount Sinai, or any number of claimed miracles that have happened. Does that mean by default that if God was involved with those miracles, therefore God is giving his or her stamp that is absolute truth? I don't know. Maybe God wanted religions to emerge on the planet. Maybe God influenced human society during different periods so that different people would subscribe to different religions. But maybe it was never God's intention for the moral framework of any particular religion to persist forever on planet Earth. We assume that must be the case, right? We have rhetoric like, well, if it's true, it's always true. But to me, this ignores the potentiality that that's not actually the intention of God. The intention of God is for us to evolve collectively over time. And if you had some kind of religious doctrine that was ground truth, the blueprint for life, right? Then it wouldn't be so much about evolving and collectively arguing and debating and our morals morphing over time, but it would be something very different. It would instead be us becoming more and more adherent to this religion or that religion. And so it's subjective. What's more likely? Well, to me, and it's just subjective, what's more likely is that there is no religion on this planet that encapsulates some kind of perfect framework for morality. So, and let's do a little thought experiment that I think maybe in some intuitive way adds credence to that perspective. 1,000 years from now, is civilization as a whole going to see religions that were created, you know, thousands of years ago? Is civilization as a whole going to become more adherent to those philosophies or less? And I think the answer is probably both. There's a lot of extraordinary morals in religions that it would certainly be in the best interest of humanity to more closely adopt them. But alternatively, I'm not convinced that every moral dictate in any religious structure is really what humanity should be striving for. So maybe there's some kind of a middle truth, if you will, in that you can't hand wave away religions entirely because they have introduced morals that have benefited humanity. On the other hand, if you're going to take the extreme position that any particular doctrine is the full encapsulation of truth, the problem with that is, what if it's wrong, right? What if it's wrong, if that's not true, then civilization would feel pressed to maintain a moral framework indefinitely, even though that moral framework is not ideal. So I tend to think that 1,000 years from now, our morals will look different. And maybe some perspectives that we have committed to, we won't anymore. And maybe some perspectives that we didn't commit to, we will. So for me, my perspective of morality is like it's the collective it's the collective human organism over time having different consensus on various moral questions. And I think this process of evolution is going to persist regardless of the doctrine in any particular religion. And it's going to come from human minds. Now someone could say, oh, so you're making yourself God because you get to decide what's right and wrong. And I would say, well, how do you know that's not God's will? How do you know that everything can be utilized to improve our morality, but nothing should necessarily be harnessed in its totality? If we were to harness a religious doctrine written 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, whatever, as the totality of moral truth that can never be changed, can never be altered, I'm not sure humanity would reach its fullest zenith of goodness and fairness. On the other hand, if we were to completely ignore religious doctrine and not explore religious doctrine and ask ourselves, well, what makes sense and what doesn't, that could be detrimental as well. So I'm not saying religious doctrine doesn't have a place. I'm saying that it's not clear to me or convincing to me that any particular religious doctrine solves all our moral quandaries. I just don't think it's that black and white. And I'm not convinced that that's God's will. I think God wants to make it hard and make it difficult and make it something that evolves over time. Not like, oh, we've been given this revelation and all we have to do is follow this revelation forever. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I think in some sense that maybe ties into the reward structures of religions. When I look at the reward architecture of religions, I personally am just highly skeptical of them. They seem awfully unfair and unnecessary, maybe even more unnecessary than unfair. And someone could respond, well, you're just using your brain. God's ways are above our ways. You can't rely upon your brain to determine what's fair or what's prudent or what makes sense. When God's intelligence is so far beyond ours. But the problem with that retort is you could apply that to any religion. So that's just kind of where I stand. And look, maybe I'm wrong, right? Whatever it is that I believe, maybe I'm wrong. But the fact of the matter is, whatever it is you believe that it's watching this, maybe you're wrong. I think to boil down something that I feel fairly strong about is that people who are committed to any kind of religious pathway, they can be completely convinced that their pathway is the ultimate truth and that the logic and evidence for it far outweighs any competing philosophy. But that sincere conviction that they hold can be equally held by another human being who adopts another philosophy and who is equally as sincere. So I guess I'm a big part of my perception, I guess, or my personality. I'm not a fan of conviction. I'm not a fan of conviction because I think conviction of anything holds so many assumptions, and those assumptions don't necessarily hold up. And that makes me start thinking of UFOs. Some skeptics are convinced that, just as an example, some skeptics are convinced that if UFOs were here and they were the manifestation of non-human intelligence, we would have endless arrays of video and photo captures proving that. So the fact that we don't have endless arrays of photo and videos recording this activity, therefore, it's almost certain that it's all misidentification. Now, on paper, that makes sense, but it doesn't necessarily turn out that way. Now, why would something like that, right? Why would that not necessarily? Why would something like that have no potential to apply to religions? Like people say, well, God would not hold us accountable for transgressions unless he gave us a perfect blueprint for how to live. Sounds good, it sounds convincing, but it's still too many assumptions are built into that framework. We don't know how God would we really don't know how God would interact with humanity. We make assumptions. We make the assumption that if God gave us a revelation, therefore that revelation must be 100% true. But what if that's not the case? What if God could give us a revelation, but at some point in time wanted us to transcend that revelation or move beyond that revelation or debate that revelation and come up with something better? Why is that not a plausible outcome? From my perspective, maybe part of disclosure, maybe part of this UFO reality is to bend our minds and to make us think outside of the box that we live in. Whatever that box is, from whatever background you come from, or in whatever box I'm in, maybe part of the UFO presence and subsequent disclosure is to get us to doubt our own self, regardless of how much conviction we have for our perception. I don't know if that makes sense, but of course, this is a UFO channel, so I was going to factor in UFOs to this philosophical discussion. But I'm going to leave it at that. I know this is a pretty weird video, and I want to say this is not an attack on religion at all. I'm not attacking religion. Maybe there's a religion out there that's ultimate truth, and I'm the one that's wrong. Yeah, it's possible. I'm open to that possibility. But by definition, any particular religion critiques everything else. Because if you believe you have the ultimate truth, then you're by definition critiquing everything else. How could you not? Even if it's unstated, you're still saying this is right and that is wrong. So for anyone to perceive this as me attacking religion, I would say that's really bizarre, because aren't I just doing what your religion does or what other religions do? I'm critiquing all the other philosophies, assuming that mine holds the most weight. But ultimately, I really don't know. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with not knowing what the ultimate truth is. I'm not convinced I'm supposed to know what the ultimate truth is. I'm not convinced that society will be better off 1,000 years from now if all 10 billion humans are following a particular religious doctrine. Maybe a more optimal moral framework will emerge that takes what's good from religion, but's also able to look at any particular religious doctrine and say, you know what, this portion is not so good. But of course, the retort to that is, well, truth never changes. Truth is always the same. And we were given the entire truth. Yeah, maybe you were, and maybe you weren't. You know, maybe humanity evolves over time and morals evolve over time, maybe partly because we're so imperfect as a human species that we weren't even designed to come to that perfect framework, because it would take hundreds, thousands of years to work out. And maybe it's an endless process, and maybe there's never any ultimate perfection to it. If you look at the near-death experiences and you look at the life review, and I am influenced by near-death experiences, I do find them highly compelling. And maybe even ironically, I see the justice framework to be the most fair. The closest thing to hell that I know of, or purgatory that I know of, that is demonstrated in near-death experiences, is that how you made someone feel, you will feel. So you will have utter clarity about how your behavior impacted your fellow human being. And for all we know, how we do in this life determines the quality of our next life. I don't know. There are a lot of mysteries. But at the end of the day, I think most humans believe there is a God. And so to have a conversation about that, I think that's a good thing. And I think we can do that without trying to shove religion down other people's throats. And I'm saying that within the... I'm saying that with me, because I'm not trying to convince you of what the truth is, because I honestly don't know what the truth is, and I feel completely comfortable about that. But I still think we can have a fun and productive conversation about what the truth could be. And I will just say that, like, as I've said, I'm very skeptical of religion. I'm very skeptical that making XYZ mistakes in a finite life is somehow going to impact negatively our eternal destiny. That seems crazy to me. That seems so unfair and not godlike. It makes much more sense to me that God would give us endless chances. Endless. And would not be like us humans, where we have limitations in that. That's just my perspective. But who cares what I think? I'm just trying to have the conversation. And in my next video, I have the feeling that it's going to be purely about UFOs. I'll see you in the next episode. Special thanks to all patrons, YouTube members, those that have bought merch, those that have given me one-time donation. I couldn't do without you. Thank you so much. See you in the next episode.